guest today is the one and only Daryl Hall. Daryl, you've been out this summer with Todd Rundgren on the road. How did that come together?
Well, I have a what I call a body of work album that I put out in February, March, I forget, and I wanted to tour behind it and play songs that are my part of my solo work, and I wanted somebody to sort of make the Life of Daryl's House experience come to the stage. And my first thought was my old friend Todd Rundgren, and because it really is a perfect combination. His musical history and mine are sort of very unique and similar. And it's a great. It wound up being a really great show. He uses my band, and then we do stuff together and stuff separately, and it's all really working out very well.
Now, you're both from the Philly area. In the late '60s, Todd was from Upper Darby. He had the band Naz. Were you aware of all that? Did you like that? Did you know Todd back then?
I didn't know Todd back in the late '60s. He worked. He was doing that stuff, right? He was in Naz and Woody's Truck Stop and all those bands, which I was aware of. But I was definitely well ensconced in the world of Philly soul, with Gamble and Huff and Tommy Bell and people like that, and all the radio stations that were involved in that genre. And so we didn't really know each other, and we really met in New York in the early '70s. Appropriately at a movie showing of Fantasia.
And how did Todd end up producing the third Hall and Oates album, War Babies?
Well, it started with that. I thought I had just moved to New York, and I was experiencing New York. I was really full of beans. It was like Philadelphia was one experience. I had left that, and I said, I want to do something completely different and really open my mind up and open my mind to the sound of New York. When I say the sound, the actual street sounds of New York. And I wanted to make a record and write songs that reflected that. And I was aware of Todd's, he had just started working with Utopia, and I went to see him bunch of times, really, and I was so impressed with what he was doing. And also, that was when he was in his role. He was producing everybody from Alice Cooper to the New York Dolls to God knows who, a million people. And I said, okay, well, why don't this on paper sounds good, an ex-Philadelphia moved to New York. Obviously, he's going to understand, creative person, and let's try and see what happens. And what War Babies album is the result of what happened.
Well, that was your third album on Atlantic, and it was not commercially successful. Now, most people, when things are not happening, they sort of break apart from those people. How did you maintain a relationship with Todd?
I have always respected Todd. And it was just because it wasn't a commercially accessible or a commercially accepted album, that really wasn't what my agenda was about with that album. I was naive enough and idealistic enough to just say, okay, let's move on. I did that. That was an interesting experience, and let me use that and incorporate that into whatever the future is. And I never really lost track of Todd over the years, and so we've sort of maintained this kind of loose relationship for all those years.
Now, ultimately, you and your partner produced the Hall and Oates albums together, Daryl Hall and John Oates. What did you learn from working with Todd?
I learned what not to do.
So what shouldn't you do?
Try and be accessible. Don't be inaccessible for its own sake. That is a lesson I learned. Todd's a stubborn guy, and he has an aversion to being easily accepted. And I used to have arguments with him about it. I said, Todd, this song, this could work out really well. A lot of people would like it. And he did everything he could to fuck with that idea. It's his personality, and he's in his mellowness and age now. He has accepted the idea that you can be accessible, which is even a better reason for us to be working together on stage.
Okay. Do you think if someone else had produced War Babies or you'd done it yourself, it would have been more commercially viable?
It would have been more commercially viable, but it would have been the same album. Maybe I don't even know if it would have been the same songs. I tend to write for projects, and that was written with the idea that I was going to work with Todd in New York in a New York environment, and I may have written a completely different set of songs on my own or with somebody else or whatever.
Tell me about writing for projects. What do you mean there?
Well, I don't write. I mean, I do write randomly, but I tend to not focus my writing until I know that I'm going to either work with somebody or there's some project that's coming up, and then I write with that in mind. It sort of energizes me, and I start writing like crazy, and coming up with ideas and do this all of a piece, and that tends to come out. I like to keep a momentum going. Recently I've deviated from that, and I didn't like that because I was doing a lot of false starts because I was so busy with other things, and I would get all excited about something and do it, and then it would sort of sit on the shelf. And I don't like doing that. I like working for the project, putting out the project, keeping the enthusiasm going for the project, and taking it to its completion.
So what would be the time window prior to going into the studio? We call an album a project. When would you get excited and then start to compose?
When I knew I was going to start doing it. When it started getting scheduled and I knew who I was going to work with. And even in the early stages of the recordings, I would, my mind would be on fire, and I write things very spontaneously and quickly. That's usually the way it has worked for me.
Okay, and you say you change the content depending on who you're working with?
Yeah, to some degree. I change the mood. I won't change the emotional source of the song. That comes from me and my experiences. But as far as production goes, and even the melodies I choose or the chords I choose, it really has to do a lot with the moment, with what I'm trying to, with the people that I'm working with, really. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning. You grew up in the Philly area, in town, in the suburbs, where?
I grew up in Pottstown, which is in Chester County, and it was an industrial town with farms all around it, and I sort of had my feet on both sides. I lived amidst farmland, a bicycle ride away from the deepest neighborhoods that you want to deal with, and so I've always been a sort of a rural-urban person, a foot on both sides.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My mother was a singer, and she was in a band, and she worked also at a radio station, the Pottstown radio station, and my father ran a pattern making department because Pottstown at that time was a very industrial town.
And how many kids in the family?
I have a sister. That's it. 5 years younger than me.
And what's your relationship with her?
Extremely close. Anything you see visually ever is my collaboration with her. She's a graphic designer, artist, many things, and she sort of controls my visual world.
Okay, I'm a little younger than you, and I remember listening to the early 60s radio, knowing some of those tracks, listening to sports, and then the Beatles hit, and it really took off. What was your experience listening to radio and getting into music?
Well, in Philadelphia, it's a really unique environment, or it was a really unique environment. It continues to be, really, to some degree. And when I was a teenager, pop radio was not popular in Philadelphia. People, the hip bourgeoisie, anyway, it wasn't popular with those people. And if you were cool, you either listened to soul music, which was everywhere, and that was baby food, or even the precursor of that, which was street corner music, which was a cappella music and doo-wop and early vocal rock and roll. And there was a guy named Jerry Blavat, who was a very, very influential person to people who cared about music. And I was just a total devotee of that. And I was sort of a street corner singer. And that was my beginnings, doing that. And then that's closely aligned with the whole soul thing, you know? I mean, vocal groups, whether they be the Temptations or the Dandeliers, you know, it's just a progression of the same kind of music. But we rejected. I mean, the Beatles were not even thought about in Philadelphia until later period. Let's say around Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, people started saying, "Oh, the Beatles have something interesting to offer Philadelphians." Before that, they just looked at them like a bar band.
Okay, you say you were a street corner singer. You're living in a rural area. What did that literally look like, being a street corner singer?
Well, my parents lived in a rural area, but all their friends lived in the black neighborhood in Philadelphia. In Pottstown. So I sort of lived. Sometimes I would sleep at home, but especially in the summertime, I would just be over there on Walnut Street in Pottstown, and there was music on the streets. That's the best way I could put it. It was an integrated neighborhood, and it was the kind of music I liked. Everything from gospel music and church music, from the corner churches to people playing record players in their houses on the front porches and stuff like that.
Okay, you come from a soul influence. What about doo-wop or Dion and the Belmonts? Were those part of your consciousness? Was that something different?
Well, Dion and the Belmonts were way too pop. I mean, that's that kind of thing, yes. Doo-wop music, vocal group, you know, people just standing around, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so you're growing up. What kind of kid are you? Good student, bad student, have a lot of friends, an outsider?
I was an outsider. I was a restless person. I know you know this, Bob. I'm an avid reader. I'm a bookworm and an historian and all that kind of thing. That put me at odds as a child, you know. I was a good student. A very good student until I got to be a teenager, and then I became a very restless and indifferent student. And I was more interested in hanging out than I was doing my homework.
So, at what point did you learn to play a musical instrument?
I started playing piano at 5, and I took formal piano lessons until I was about 12 or 13. And then my mother, for some bizarre reason, decided that she wanted me to play the trombone. And I picked up the trombone, and I pretty much hated the trombone. You know, I mean, what a cornball instrument. But I wanted to play the saxophone, but she said something about your mouth shape isn't right for that. You know, why didn't I get a saxophone? I don't know. But so I stopped the piano lessons and then started playing on my own and writing songs and becoming, learning, sort of playing self-taught, self-teaching. And then when I went to Temple University music school, so then I resumed my more formal piano studies, and I was actually a piano opera major, and went there for 5 years.
But you didn't graduate, right?
I quit a few weeks before graduation.
What was the reason there?
I had a choice between having to complete this rigorous student teaching program or play in a bar band. And I thought it was a good bar band, and my supervisor says, you can't do both. You have to choose your life. Either you're going to do this music education thing, or you're going to be a rock and roll singer. And I said, okay, you just made my mind up for me. Goodbye. Bye.
Now, frequently when someone has as much success as you do, their old college reaches out and gives them an honorary degree or something. Has Temple reached out?
Yeah, I didn't bother with it. I've been offered honorary degrees by Berkeley and Temple, and I just I'm not interested. I don't care.
Okay, so when you're going to Temple, you're then living in Philly?
Oh yeah, I moved to Philadelphia when I was 17, and immediately jumped into the heart of the whole thing, and that was the great thing about going to Temple University. We're in North Philadelphia, 5 blocks from the Uptown Theater, and in the middle of one of the deepest black neighborhoods in the city, and I lived and inhabited that area for 5 years, and beyond that, of course, and that really sort of formed me. I already mentioned what I was into in Pottstown, but then when I got to Philly, it really just kind of locked in, and I immediately met, within a few months, I met Gamble and Huff and Tommy Bell and people like that, and so it all started formalizing and coalescing.
Okay, so when you went to Temple on this music program, what did you think? Do you think, well, I got to do something now, or I want to do something, more classical, or I want to mark time before I become a rock and roll or soul star? What was in your mind?
Well, no, I was learning things in school. I learned how to be an arranger, and I did a lot of solfeggio, and I honed my craft formally. But at the same time, I was singing on the corner, and I was hanging out and making records with the Temp Tones, and hanging out with Tommy Bell and people like that. So it was that, to me, that was my real education, was being introduced and working with the early Philadelphia sound.
Well, how did you meet Tom Bell and Gamble and Huff?
I had a band. We formed at Temple called the Temp Tones. It was a vocal group. And they used to have, just like the Apollo in New York, they used to have talent shows on, I believe it was Wednesday nights, and we did a talent show at the Uptown Theater, and we won the talent show, and the prize was you got to make a record with Kenny and Leon.
Wow!
And so they had this, small label, Arctic Records. We went into this 4-track studio, Virtue Sound Studios, and Frankie Virtue's studio, and we made a record, and this guy Jimmy Bishop, who was a DJ and one of the top DJs in WDAS in Philadelphia, picked us up and started sort of semi-managing us, and we had a chart record in WDAS charts, R&B charts, and through that, I can't remember how I met Tommy. I actually can't remember, but I immediately got along with him, and I used to go and hang out. He used to have an office at Cameo Parkway. This was before Philadelphia International, and I used to go and sit there and listen to him play the piano and come up with ideas, and so I certainly learned a lot from Tommy Bell.
What year are we in?
67, 68.
Okay.
69.
The
yeah.
fact that you were white, did they see color? Were you the only white guy? Was it accepted? Was it integrated?
In those days, it was integrated. I never once had a problem with any of that stuff back in the day. I never have since then.
So you have a dream, you have a record, it's on the chart. What did that feel like? I mean, it's played on the radio.
It was wild. I remember I was walking on Broad Street, and these kids, they were really cool kids, like, cool Italian kids. They look like they could have been on American Bandstand or something. And they're walking down the street and they're singing girl, I love you. And they're all like harmonizing. And I ran up to them and I said, hey man, that's my song. That's my song. And they went, oh yeah, get the fuck out of here. You know?
So you have that one success. Then what about a follow-up?
Oh, I don't know. I wasn't thinking about follow-ups. My brain wasn't. It's never been there, Bob. You know, I'm not a commercially oriented person, and the irony is that I've had such success commercially, but I don't really fucking care about that stuff. I don't write for those kind of with that in mind. We made another record, you know, and it was called "Say These Words of Love." It didn't do anything, and then I moved on. And the Temptones broke up, and then, like I said, I moved on.
Okay, when you moved on, you know, you had these singing groups. At what point did you form a band and it was more, you know, rock and soul?
I never really, I was in a bar band for a while. And that was what I quit the Temple for. And it was called Pal and the Prophets. And that was the closest thing to a bar band I was ever in. And, I don't know. I didn't really get along with Powell that well. He's a good guy, but we bumped heads. So that didn't last too long. And then I started just sort of kicking around and using my connections. I started hanging out with in Sigma Sound and doing backup work, doing the odd keyboard playing and things like that, odds and ends, and sort of hooked up with this guy named John Madera, who was one of his claim to fame was he wrote At the Hop, okay? He wrote You Don't Own Me with Leslie Gore and 1, 2, 3 with Lenny Perry.
Oh, I love that.
I mean, that's John Madera. You know, he wrote those songs. And he had a production and publishing company, and I sort of attached myself to that. And he gave me a little money occasionally, and I'd play, I'd do sessions for like $30 and stuff like that. And I lived in a place that only cost $85 a month, so it wasn't that hard to live. And then at the end of all that is when I met John, and we decided to play some songs together acoustically, and we started playing in coffee houses and places like that. And that's when that started.
Okay, when you met John and you formed a band and playing acoustically, was that because it was the moment, the late 60s, what was going on? Because that seems to be a little bit of a change from your soul background.
It was a change. I think that meeting John, the reason that I got together with him is because he was involved in a scene that I didn't know anything about. I knew nothing about bluegrass music or folk music or any of that kind of stuff. It wasn't, it was invisible to me. And I was sort of fascinated by it because I was still a student, and I was trying to expand my mind, and I was trying to learn about things that I didn't know about. And I did gravitate to bluegrass music because it's its own kind of soul. I mean, bluegrass is very soulful music. And I started listening to that, and he started turning me on to all that stuff. And that was really how we formulated our early relationship musically, was my natural, what I do, my background, my soul thing, and his, what they call these days Americana, and mixing those two things together.
Okay, you're doing this. It's just one of the many things you're doing, or you're saying, wait a second, this is my road to success?
Well, at that point, we were sort of doing both. I was still with Gamble and Huff doing stuff. But one day, I can remember this. I had made a decision, and Kenny, he came to me. He said, "Do you want to work with Philadelphia International? Do you want to be a songwriter? Or you want to be an artist?" And I said no. I said, I think I want to move to New York with Oates, and we're gonna take what we do and go out of Philadelphia. I wanted to expand outside of Philadelphia. I don't know why, but I did. And so that was a decision made. and we moved to New York, and then all that other shit started.
Okay, let me stay, when you're in Philadelphia, what is your rep? Are you known as that guy who's got that voice? Or you're just one of the people? How were you perceived?
Yeah, I was perceived that way. That guy, that guy that sings that way. I was, it was a relatively small environment and community, and I had a reputation for doing what I do.
Now, for those on the inside, they know that success is not accidental. And usually it's a matter of relationships, working the relationships. Anybody who's working in bands who's not successful knows that. So are you relatively a hustler or connector? To what degree was John like that? What was going on?
I am a person who takes advantage of opportunities whenever I can find them, and if I feel like they make sense to me. I'm certainly more that way than Oates was.
Okay, so you moved to New York. No manager, no band. Where do you live? What's the first step?
Well, I did sort of have a manager. Okay, so we'll go back to that. I did not get along with John Madeira. Ultimately, we parted company not so well. And but the one thing that he did for me is he had a temporary. He used to lease his publishing out, and at the time he had leased his publishing out to Chapel Music up in New York. And I went up there and with him to go to the office one time. I don't know why, and met this kid named Tommy Mottola, and he was 21 years old, and he had an office the size of a telephone booth, and I'm not even sure if that was his office, but anyway, he said, "Hey, what's going on?" And we became started talking, became friends, and he heard what I did, and he said, "Why don't you move to New York City and I'll manage you?" And he was 21 years old. Well, I was only 22. And I said, "Okay, I can't stand what I'm doing, so let's go for it." And he started pretending to be a manager. And one thing that happened at Chapel, which was very useful, is that this guy named Norm Weiser, who was his boss, hooked me up with a trip, and John too, with a trip to the West Coast, and we went to LA, and we started auditioning to people, 4 people, and we wound up with this guy named Earl McGrath, who had a little tiny label called Clean Records, and he used to be he had a salon of musicians and artists and all that, and we played for him, and he said, "Would you like to sign to our label?" And we said yes. And then he, for whatever his reasons, that this is a part I behind the scenes that I don't know about, somehow that parlayed into me auditioning for Arif Mardin and Ahmet and Jerry Greenberg in New York City. And the next thing I knew, Earl gave up his claim to us, and I was on Atlantic Records.
Well, of course, Earl ended up running Rolling Stones records, which was through Atlantic. Who knows what the story was there. So what year are we in?
Okay, this is about 1972.
Okay, so is it you and John that are out there?
Yeah, this is a Hall and Oates story.
Okay, right. So Tommy makes a deal with Atlantic Records?
Tommy didn't have the ability to make.
That's what's going to be my question.
He was 21 years old. No. This guy, Earl McGrath, made a deal. Earl McGrath said, "Check these guys out." I sat down to a broken piano and played for Arif Mardin with the flu and Ahmet, and they said, "You're signed, buddy," and that's how it happened.
Okay, who made the deal for you? Did you have a lawyer, or what? How did that happen?
Yeah, I had a lawyer, and I can't remember his name. I did have a lawyer. Yes, a lawyer was involved.
Okay, frequently when someone is knocked around as much as you have, if you have any success, somebody comes out and says, I have paper, I had a contract, those songs are mine. That happened to you at all?
Yes, John Madera. John Madera has been living off me for years. He made claims of owning demos that I did on my own and with John and with these guys. This guy named Tommy Sellers. We had this kind of studio band we called Gulliver, and he put them out under Hall and Oates record, early days Hall and Oates and all that. And I never saw a dime from it at all. And that's that story. But yes, of course, that inevitably happens.
Okay, so you sign with Atlantic, you're making a record. Where along the line do you have a band, or if you ever have a band?
Well, we started, when we were playing in these tiny places, there was just the two of us. And then we did add a drummer and a guy who played upright bass and electric bass. And so by the time we actually had this beginning of a record deal, we actually had a four-piece band. And we went in the studio with the first album with with those guys to some degree, and also Arif's studio bands, various people that he liked to use for the Atlantic records.
Okay, you moved from Philly to New York with Tommy's, instigation. What was it like suddenly being in New York, and did you ever gain a rep in New York, or just Tommy got you to go to the West Coast when you meet Earl McGrath, etc.?
No, we didn't really move to New York until we had already signed with Atlantic, and we're in the process of starting to make the first record. And so we were newcomers in town, and we were in the Atlantic studios, and like that. I mean, we weren't really even playing in New York. It was mostly just for recording, and then we were playing in Philadelphia. We played a few other places. We weren't really playing live a lot at that period of time.
Okay. You meet John, you ultimately live together. The nature of these relationships is you kind of grow up with people, then you grow apart, you're in, buses. How do you maintain a friendship, if at all? Or how do you start to argue over, this ends up being over decades?
It becomes sort of very similar to brothers in my case, in John's case. You get along with your brother. Sometimes you don't get along with your brother. You don't have to be around that person, but yet you see him at Christmas time. And you go, hey, how you doing? And that's as much as you need to do. That kind of stuff. That pretty much describes my relationship with John. We have experienced a lot together over the years, and we've experienced a lot separately. And time changes. Time changes things. It changes your relationship. It doesn't change certain things. Brothers are brothers, but time does change things.
Okay, so you make a record with Arif, who's someone with a lot of experience and a lot of success. What was that like, and what'd you learn from Arif?
Everything. I learned everything from Arif. He was unbelievable. I will never stop saying that. The best thing ever happened to me was my relationship with Arif. He was to me, Arif and Quincy Jones are the two best producers in modern music. He could do anything. He could put anything together and make it work and make it real. His musical knowledge was so disparate. It was so all-encompassing. That you couldn't throw anything at him. No artist could throw anything at him that he didn't have the ability to relate to and understand and formulate into something coherent and good. He was a real gentleman, and I had a very close relationship with him for years and years, even after all this stuff went down, and all the way to his death. I had a relationship with him.
Okay, a lot of people say they make their first record even though you had experience in your case, and they're kind of overwhelmed and they let the producer steer them. Was that your experience, or you have so much experience you could sort of stand up for what you wanted?
Well, I didn't know what I wanted with the Reef. The Hall and Oates record, I don't even like that record, if you want the truth. But I like what a Reef did to it. That's the best part. The best part is a Reef of that record. It was a bunch of songs that we had written while we were in school and all that, and it was sort of a compilation that we decided it was a first album, you know. So I was more than happy to have somebody like a Reef directing the show. Now, I'm not usually like that, and I don't respond so well to autocratic producers. He wasn't that, by the way, but I was very happy that he jumped in and made something out of that record and out of those songs.
Okay, what does the label say when the first record is not really successful?
They didn't. It was different times, man. They said, don't worry about hits, just make great music, and that was what Ahmet said to me, and I'll always respect him for that. You know, they believed in developing artists.
So next you make Abandoned Luncheonette. What's a different experience there from making the first album?
Well, that was purpose written. That was written for that project, as I was talking about earlier, and it was to me that was a Hall and Oates album. There was a lot of John contributed a lot to that album. And She's Gone is the ultimate contribution. That is the ultimate Hall and Oates song because it was written by Hall and Oates. And it was a really, really exquisitely produced album. Interestingly produced. I don't think there's anything like it. It's a bizarre album, but in its own way. And I continue to be very proud of that album. I think that was a great album, and it defines whatever. And if you want to talk about Hall and Oates, that's the record to pay attention to.
Now, frequently when someone writes a classic, they know it. And did you know She's Gone was a classic? And how did you feel about the fact it didn't get traction at that time?
I don't think anybody knows they write a classic until after the fact. That's impossible to know. I knew that we wrote a good song. A Reef, his eyes lit up the first time I played it. I sat down and played that riff that I play on the piano. I knew that there was something good about it, and I was what's the word? I was patient enough to let the cards fall. You know, I mean, the first thing that happened was it got covered by a bunch of people. Even Lou Rawls covered it. You know, Tavares had a hit with it, and it wasn't until Sara Smile that anybody really focused on it as a Daryl and John song. Although on quote underground radio, it got a lot of play back in those days.
Okay. Who owned your publishing at that point?
Well, that's always been a murky subject. I don't even know. I wasn't paying it. I was stupid, like many people are stupid, and I wasn't paying much attention to my publishing. I didn't even understand publishing back then.
When did you learn about publishing?
Too late.
So who owns your songs today?
I own 25% of them.
And the other 75%?
Yeah. Right now, BMG.
Okay, just so I know, 25% of the publishing, such that if you write the song, you get 75 cents on the dollar?
No, I get 25% on the dollar.
25% period.
Yeah.
Okay, and BMG does not own it, it's just licensed to BMG?
No, they own it.
Okay, so let's assume you stop working tomorrow, owning only 25% of your publishing. Is that enough to have you make ends meet?
Yeah, probably is.
Okay, so you make the second album, you make the third album. At what point do you realize there's going to be no future at Atlantic, and how did you end up at RCA?
Well, it was more business. Again, this was more Tommy Mottola talking to people. You know, he talked to this guy Mike Berniker. I gotta remember these names at RCA, and I think they offered us a lot of money to leave. And I think Jerry Greenberg said it's okay. It's not really clicking yet, and we'll let it go. And I'm not quite sure how that all went down, but that's sort of what happened.
Well, I don't know to what degree you were conscious, but at the time, RCA did not have a good reputation for breaking acts.
I didn't know shit. All I know is they were giving us, Mottola. I was incredibly ignorant, Bob. That's all I can say.
Okay, so how did you approach the first album in RCA differently from how you approached the records on Atlantic?
I can't remember who produced it. It was Chris Bond. I was working. We had a guitar player named Christopher Bond. And he was active when they abandoned Lunch and That record. And he said, let me produce you. And I said, okay. And it was basically, he was the band's guitar player. And he was a very talented guy. And I don't know what else to say about it. I wrote a bunch of songs, and there they are.
So how'd you write Sara Smile?
Sat down at the piano and wrote it. It was... I was living in an apartment at 82nd Street, and it was a postcard. I mean, Sandy was there. I mean, she was in the other room probably when I wrote it.
Well, were you writing it for a project, or did you get an inspiration standing in the shower and go, I got to run with this?
Oh, well, I mean, I totally inspirational. I mean, all my songs are inspirational. It just happens to be within the project. But yes, I knew that I was writing for that album, and I said, okay, here's a song. I mean, it was total inspiration.
And so let's assume you're writing for a project. You know, you could sit in your studio and say, strum the guitar, or you could wait for a bolt of lightning. What is that experience like? Or are there certain tricks you use to try to be inspired?
Well, tricks. There are no tricks. I just observe. I observe and open my heart. And that's how things happen. That's as simple as that. It's anti-intellectual.
Well, two things. What happens if it's not coming?
I walk away. I just move on. I don't belabor it. Ever.
Okay, do you ever say, this isn't working, so let me go to a movie, let me go out for a drive, and maybe that'll loosen me up?
Well, yeah, I don't even sit down with the idea that I'm going to do anything. I usually, it's an inspiration, and I walk over to the guitar, walk over to a keyboard, and make something happen. It isn't that I sit there, and like in a typewriter, and say, okay, well, this is working, and this isn't working. It's working because I walk over to the keyboard.
Now, in one of these projects, did you ever find that you weren't inspired enough before the recording date hit?
No, I always rise to the occasion. The results aren't always what I was hoping for or whatever, but I rise to the occasion. I always do.
So how'd you meet the Allen sisters?
I met Sarah Allen in Philadelphia. Actually, John introduced me to her. Johnny used to like to walk around. He still probably does that. On the streets and just say hello to people. And Sarah Allen, was living around the corner, not to my knowledge. She was just out of college. She worked for Charter Airline. And she was in and out of town, and she came over to the house one day and I met her. And I said, oh, hello, and we eventually something clicked, and we wound up living together. And I'm trying to remember. We didn't live together in Philadelphia. That was right around the time when I was moving to New York. And we shared that apartment on 82nd Street. And her sister lived in Chicago. She was only a kid. And I met her around that time, family stuff. And we grew very close, all the three of us. And Jana moved to the East Coast. And we were all sort of hanging out together. And it was really quite nice. I mean, like I said, Jana was just a kid, but she was a very eager to learn kid. She was really a talented musician, I have to say. She was really talented.
Okay, now you'd been married. How'd you decide to get married as your work, as things are kind of bouncing off the walls before? So
that was. I look at that as kid stuff. You know, it was, you know, the era I grew up in. You went steady and you got married. You know, I mean, this girl. It was school stuff, and we quickly learned that we weren't going to last. You know, we were just kids, and it lasted like 2.5 years, something like that.
How did it end?
Amicably. It did. Just sort of boom.
And in the 5 decades, 50 years since then, have any contact or never?
I haven't seen her. I haven't seen her in decades.
Okay. So how do you end up writing songs with the Allen sisters?
Well, it started on the Silver album. I had this song, You Know It Doesn't Matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. And, I mean, Sandy was around, you know. And when we say Sandy, it's Sara, you know. And she was around.
Just as we're there, is her birth name Sandy or Sara, and how did one
Sara.
become the other?
Her name is Sara Allen, and she, everybody calls her Sandy that knows her.
Any reason why? Do we know?
She's been Sandy since she was a kid.
Okay, so you're sitting around, continuing the narrative.
So anyway, I'll use Sandy now because now that everybody knows who Sara is, and she used to just sit around and well, she'd be there, you know, in the house. I'd write in the living room, you know, and she started contributing things, and that song, You Know It Doesn't Matter Anymore, she contributed to the song. And I went, oh, okay, well, she actually has something interesting to say here. And in those days, it was not anything official, and she didn't really write with me very much in those days. I can't remember when she actually started really collaborating or co-writing or throwing lyrics out. I can't remember which song would have been the first one other than that one. But in the late, around 1980, all those 80s songs is when it really came into fruition. And she was really in the middle of all that and really contributing a lot. And as far as Jana goes, Jana's the first song I ever wrote with Jana. She was at that time she was living with her parents. Not with her parents. She was living in L.A. And she had the idea of a song called "Kiss on My List," and it was the first song I ever wrote with her. She was 20, and I sat down to a Wurlitzer piano she had in her little living room, and I started playing those chords. And she started, you know, we literally wrote the song together. And I wrote it because she said she wanted to be an artist. And I said, well, let's write a song for you. And I did that song, and I went back to New York and made it. I did a 4-track demo of it. And that's what you hear. That's the 4-track demo. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Kiss it.
Okay, let's go back to the Silver album. So Sara Smile is a hit, and in the wake of that, She's Gone is released and is a hit too. What was your experience there?
Sara Smile had an amazing and somehow appropriate beginning. We had released, that was the third single that RCA released on the Silver album. And we were in Germany we were in Germany touring, and somebody said, in Ohio, on the black stations in Ohio, suddenly they're playing Sara Smile. I think it started in Dayton or Akron or somewhere like that. I can't remember. And it suddenly started spreading all over in all the black stations. And we had a hit on R&B radio. And it was like, whoa, this is happening? And it really was word of mouth. It was one of those things that spread like wildfire. And then pop radio, what I call white radio, at that time, started playing it, and it became this giant hit. But it all started in the black community. I mean, Sara Smile was generated from that world, which again I find to be appropriate to the song and to my career in life.
So that's successful. She's gone as successful. How does that change your confidence and outlook?
Well, I figured we had some ability to stick around for a while. I mean, I didn't have any master plan, but I thought, okay, well, it's working. Something's working. Now we can go out and tour, you know? Now we can play. We have songs to play for people that they want to hear. And it was the beginning, you know? It was the beginning. It validated what I was doing, and that's encouraging. Validation is really an important thing because it makes you more confident in what you're doing.
Okay, so that record, how does the Bigger Than Both of Us album come together?
That was another Chris Bond record, and we did it in we decided to, well, he was living in California, and we decided to go out there and do it. And it was, that's all I could say. It was a California record, and the musicians, the sidemen that were on it, were a lot of the LA players.
Okay, so how did you write Rich Girl?
Okay, we'll backtrack a little bit, and I'm back at 82nd Street in my apartment. Same keyboard I wrote Sara Smile on. Sandy had a old boyfriend came over from Ohio, and he was, this was mid-70s, early 70s. Everybody was high as a motherfucker, you know. And he was, let's see. I think his father had a fast food chain or something like that. I'm a little vague on all that. But anyway, he in my perception, he was a rich guy, you know. He came from a rich family, and so he left, and he was acting kind of strange. I mean, he was a good guy, but it gave me the inspiration, and I sat down as he left. I went, he's a rich guy, and he's gone too far because he knows it don't matter anyway. And I wrote it about rich guy, and then I said, no, that doesn't sound right. I can't write a song called Rich Guy, so I changed it to Rich Girl.
Did you know as you were writing it how successful it would be?
Nah. No, definitely not.
So you cut it in LA, you got a finished version, you still have no idea how successful it'll be.
I think it's the rare person, and in my entire career, and I've had a lot of fucking success, commercially, I never was sure. Everything's a surprise. Everything's a surprise. Sometimes songs that I thought were going to be hits were zero. And sometimes I thought songs, okay, whatever, became hits. You never know, man. You can't tell. And a lot of that has to do with things that are out of my control. It has to do with the fucking payola and, record business and all that bullshit.
Okay, I vividly remember hearing Rich Girl the first time and having to go buy the album, which was great. Needless to say, that becomes an iconic hit. How does life change for you?
It didn't really change. It was just more of the same. You gotta understand something too. Tommy Mottola was a very controlling human being. I think anybody that knows anything about Tommy Mottola's history, He liked to keep things under his control. He didn't like things to get out of control. He didn't like things to get too high or too low. And you were sort of in a bubble. Ask Mariah Carey. You were in a bubble if you were controlled by Tommy Mottola. And it wasn't conducive to highs and, major highs, or realizing where you were, or what you were doing. All I knew that I was a road musician. I was out playing on the road. And then I was in the studio writing songs.
At what point, if any, did you start to see some money?
About 5 years ago.
Really? What changed 5 years ago?
What changed was I got the right manager for the first time in my life.
And Jonathan Wilson, he was a PR guy, and now he's your manager. How did that come together?
Well, he was a PR guy, and I realized that we had a rapport and an understanding of each other. And he had an instinct, and I ran with it and made a major decision in my life and John's life, and never looked back. And I've never been felt more justified in doing it.
And what has John done differently from the people before?
Let my instincts drive the bus.
Okay, so you have this major success. Just one thing, one lyric on there, which always sticks out for me. Earth Shoes, Chicago Blues. Was that yours or was that John's?
No, it's mine.
So Earth Shoes were a big deal then. Do you remember, a lot of people write songs, they don't like to put specific names in. Do you remember where that came from, if at all? It's a long time ago.
Specific names to what?
That you put Earth Shoes in the song.
Oh, Earth Shoes. Well, I couldn't think of, I was thinking of all the different things that you could, all the opposites that you could think of, and it didn't matter because you just have to follow your instincts, do what you want, be what you are. Do you believe in hot cars, leather bars, and movie stars? Do you believe in Earth Shoes, Chicago Blues? It's like that. I wrote that song, by the way. John didn't write that song.
Okay, the credits are such that I didn't want to make an assumption. Okay, you're incredibly hot. Then you get cold. Do you feel that you're getting cold and nothing seems to be working?
No, I don't. I felt that, first of all, the late 70s were a bizarre time. They were a bizarre time societally and a bizarre time musically. And I was caught in the crossfire. I look at that as it opened up an opportunity to me. And that's when I started working with Robert Fripp, and did those albums that I did with him, and started being more involved in that world, and that opened that expanded my life to quite a degree, and it allowed me to get to the next stage. It was a transitional period.
How did you meet Fripp, and what did you learn from Fripp?
I learned that you could have my sense of spontaneity and letting things happen quickly and on the spot, and that there were people that could roll with that and expand upon it, and you could have that kind of interaction creatively. Robert is like that. We created that shit out of nowhere. I just came up. He would just play a guitar riff, and I would start singing whatever came to my mind. And a lot of the songs are like that. Some songs are more structured than that, but a lot of it did come that way. And the Sacred Songs album, we made that album in about 6 weeks, start to finish. And the Exposure album, which I did the whole album, wrote and sang almost all the songs. That didn't take much longer. I'm thinking about it. But it's that sense of spontaneity that and freedom and joy and all those things. That's what I got from working with Robert.
Okay, how'd you end up working with David Foster? Was that your choice or foisted upon you?
It was sort of foisted. David, we were his second project. He was a kid. He was 22, and he had, I forget who he had done first. Was it Earth, Wind & Fire? Maybe it was Earth, Wind & Fire, which is a hell of a beginning. Or maybe it was Sons of Champlin. I don't know. Whatever. I'm babbling. I wouldn't call it foisted because he was suggested, and I thought that he was interesting, and I met him, and he had a very strong personality, as you can imagine, and he had very strong opinions musically, but yeah, he was a kid, so he was unformed, and we went to California and we made a couple records.
Okay, as I say, these records are not really big successes, like Bigger Than Both of Us. And the next thing I know, you're playing clubs and you put out a live album. I certainly went to the Roxy to see you. From the inside, there's no understanding that, wow, this is going in the wrong direction. We need a hit.
I don't know if it was that we ever said it's going in the wrong direction, but I think that the idea that we needed a hit, especially in the early 80s or 1980 or whatever, was certainly in our minds. If it wasn't in my mind, it was certainly in Mottola's mind.
Okay.
Yeah, like that. I mean, but then, I don't know. I wrote a bunch of songs and they became hits.
Okay, so how do you end up producing yourself, and whose idea is it to cover You've Lost That Love and Feeling?
I thought that the key to some kind of success was for me to produce I have to include John in this. For me and John to produce the album ourselves, because I just felt that nobody really understood what we were doing other than ourselves. And that came especially after working with David, who is a very talented guy. We all know that. But he had his own opinions, and he didn't necessarily see music the same way as I did. So that was the important step, is producing ourselves. And as far as You Lost That Love and Feeling, we had done the whole album, and we felt that we needed something else to round out the album. And I happened to be in the Mud Club in New York. That was one of those days when everybody went to Mud Club, and they played in the room. They were playing You Lost That Love and Feeling, and I thought to myself, well, that's an interesting thing. It's a duo. Maybe we should just do a modern version of that song. We were in Electric Lady Studios, and I think it was like the next day we went in there and we cut it. And we cut that song in about 3 hours, and there it is.
So tell me the story of You Make My Dreams.
Well, there's not a whole lot of story, other than I was sitting in my apartment in the Village, and I came up with that. My working instrument at those days was a Yamaha CP30, and I mentioned that because of the distinct sound of it. And it's that honky kind of strange, unique sound. And I just started playing that riff. And I started singing something over it. And there it was, and I You Make My Dreams. And I thought to myself, that's lame. You make my dreams come true. And I realized that I tried to think around it and outthink myself, and I went, no, I'll stick with the original thought. It's direct. It is what it is. You make my dreams come true. And then I decided I was going to offset that with a slightly more flowery verse lyric. And if you listen to those lyrics, they're a lot more high blown than You Make My Dreams Come True.
Right. So now you have unbelievable success with this album. You have 3 hits. That's got to feel good. And what do you think about going into the next record?
We were really in a whirlwind at that point. We were on the road. We were experiencing immediate success. We were all over the world. If we weren't all over the world, we were in the studio making the next record. It was a very active time, and with not a whole lot of time to reflect or understand what was going on around us. The old cliche "Eye of the Hurricane" was pretty much the way to describe 1980 to 1985.
Okay, I can't go for that. No can do. What's the story there?
We were doing the Private Eyes album, right? Yeah, and it was sort of after hours, and I had this Korg, crappy little organ, and I turned on, and I had a thing called a Roland CompuRhythm, which is the most rudimentary drum machine that ever was built, and I pressed rock and roll 1, boom, dick, dick, boom, boom, that beat, and I started playing boom, but on the organ, and then I started playing on the right hand, and I said, "Wait a minute, I think I have something here," and John was packing. He was still there, and he was packing his guitar. I said, "John, come in, plug in, just play exactly what I say to you. Play bum 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 right here." He was right there. Okay, bum 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 bum, and he played exactly what I dictated to him, and I had a track. That was it. That was the track. And then I went in the room, in the control room, and said, "Give me a microphone." And I started singing, and I started doing that, and that is literally how the song was created.
And then how did the ultimate lyrics come together?
Through my frustration.
Okay, so in the midst of all this, MTV launches, and you make videos. This is in the rudimentary era of videos at first, Private Eyes, etc. But also, suddenly, which we learn, MTV makes people bigger than ever. So what was your experience with MTV? Like it, not like it, then you end up having a long career there.
Well, I had a love-hate relationship with it. I was there, as you say, I was there from the beginning, like the first bloody day, and nobody really knew what they had, and they didn't really know what they were doing. They had no scripting. The VJs, they would just give Martha Quinn or you name it, 2 hours, just go. Here's play this one that's a bad Benatar, play this one, play that one, and just talk. And I have to hand it to these. Well, they were like radio DJs. They would just talk. And very early on, they asked me to do it, and both on my own and with John, to be VJs. And we would just do anything just to pass the time. I mean, I remember one time I had T-Bone on there cooking eggs or something in between songs. I mean, it was all kinds of, it was anything goes. It really was anything goes. And that was great. It was like the early days of television when you hear about Sid Caesar and those days. It reminds me a lot of that. It was, nobody really had any rules. So they didn't, because it was a brand new thing. So it was a really heady time, a really fun time. But then you had to deal with the videos, and the videos were, these extravaganzas generally done by cokeheads that did commercials, and they were always overblown, and they were always ridiculous, and they always had nothing to do with the song, and that was the part I didn't like. So there it is.
Okay, but now everybody all over the world not only knows your songs, they know what you look like.
Yeah.
And could you feel that change anywhere you went? People knew who you were. Was that, inhibiting or good?
It wasn't. Was it inhibiting? I mean, I had already experienced that to some degree, but it all actually my big commercial success came simultaneously with that. So I can't differentiate. I don't know. All I know is that I was, it was Daryl Mania. I mean, people would, I couldn't go to Christmas shopping or do anything. I mean, I was chased down the streets, and it was like the Beatles. That's bullshit. It was that kind of stuff. Screaming girls, and it was weird. I got to say, it was weird.
So you have a long run of success, album after album with hits. Did you just feel you would come up with hits, or did you go into the studio, or did you say you start your project, man, I gotta have something like that on the album?
No, I have never in my life thought that way, because that is the death of anything, death of creativity. I in the back of my mind, I always tried to do my best, and I realized what I was doing, but I wasn't writing songs with the idea they were going to be hits. I write the best song I can think of to express the emotion that's going on in my head, in my heart, and that doesn't get any farther than that, really. I mean, that's how the songs get written.
So, at the peak of your success, you end up going to Arista. How does that come together?
Oh, again, that was the machinations of Tommy. I didn't care where I was, if you wanted the truth. And again, more naivete and being insulated and isolated. I guess, I don't know, Clive, not Clyde. Clive Davis, he wanted us badly. I don't know, he basically gave us a pitch to go there, and I guess it worked for Alan Grubman and Tommy Mottola. It had nothing to do with me.
Clive has a big reputation for meddling with the music. Did he meddle with your music?
Yes, he tried. It didn't. My experience with Clive didn't really turn out very well, because I don't like being told what to do by anybody, and I mean, I don't want to put Clive down, but yes, he was a meddler, and what he thinks his instincts are not necessarily what's best for the artist. And I had one memorable meeting where I walked out of the meeting when he tried to get me to sing a song called "I've Got a New Blue Suit."
So, it's a bad experience all around. Clive is meddling and you have no hits. What's going through your brain?
What's next? I don't know. I can't even remember what was going on then. You know what? I don't know. I was starting to think about making some solo records, and moving into that direction for a while. And I've always spent a lot of time in England, especially in London. And I decided I had a house at that time. I had bought a house, and I decided to move to England. So I moved to England and made a couple records basically out of there. And I'm very proud of it. That's what I'm promoting right now. I'm promoting the excerpts from those albums. And I looked at that as that was a lot of fun. The early 90s were great.
Okay, so things keep moving on. MTV changes, becomes hip-hop, grunge, etc., very slick videos. You make those albums. When you come up for air, what does the world look like to you? When I came up for air out of my good time in London, it started going like, okay, now I got to figure out what I'm really going to do. And I will say that the second half of the 90s, I was looking for direction. I was looking for something. I was looking for whatever. Mottola had left. I mean, that we go back to that. In about 1989 is when we parted company. Just to be very specific, he ended up going from the management side to the label. Is that what ruptured the relationship, or is it something totally separate?
It was a combination of both. He left me for Mariah, and I say it that way because that's what it was like. And then at the same time, he managed to there's books been written about it. That he got into. Managed to get into the position of the head of Sony, and so we didn't really have. That's when our relationship changed completely, and I moved on, and I wound up with somebody who used to work in the Mottola organization, and he was also my tour manager, and he started managing me for quite a while until Jonathan came on the scene.
Okay, so prior to Mariah coming on the scene, and based on what you just said, can we say that you were number one in Tommy's book, that you trumped everything and he was thinking about you, etc.?
Oh, without a doubt. Without even a shadow of a doubt. I mean, he had other artists, and I feel bad for those other artists, if you want the truth. I mean, one of my, somebody who I think is one of the great overlooked artists is August Darnell, with Kid Creole and the Coconuts. He was managing August, but he didn't have a clue what to do with August. And even though Augie had great success in Europe, outside the United States, Tommy didn't know what to do with him. He was busy with me, basically.
And you part ways. Is that the 100% end of the relationship, or do you have any contact with them thereafter through today?
Not through today so much. We were in contact for many, many years after all that. Nowadays, we're not really so much in contact.
So you come back to the States. It's the 90s. You're looking for direction. Pick up from there.
I'm thinking. I did my solo albums, 2 solo albums. I did an album called Marigold Sky with John. Decided to try a record with John, and then I did the Do It for Love album with John. That was in England, and then we did other things. We did a Christmas album. I mean, this all kind of runs together. It was just kind of random. I don't know. We didn't really have a focused direction either as Hall and Oates or as solo artists. It was sort of in between. It was the beginning of that. It was the beginning of us going in 2 different directions, and but still doing the occasional project and doing and playing live. That was when we sort of became a live band for real and started playing everywhere. And
was that driven by a need to be on stage or a need for money?
Both. You got to make money. You have to support a band, and you have to support yourself. I'm like anybody. You have to have a job, and as far as need to do I need it? I've been doing it my whole life, so I don't know if you call that a need or not, but I do live to perform. I love to perform. I'm a performing animal.
Okay. At what point in this story do you get into construction projects?
That's a parallel story. I've been doing that forever. I grew up in a strange family of, there were either musicians and or people who worked in, like my grandfather was a stonemason and bricklayer. When I say bricklayer, he built houses, he built chimneys, he was a specialist. And I used to live on construction sites. My father built the house that I grew up in. I've always been around people who work with their hands, and carpenters and specialists. And I grew up in Chester County, which is in the midst of the 18th century, basically. That's my family houses are those kind of houses, antique structures, and I've always had a love of history. And let me think. The first house I renovated was that one I told you about that I paid $85 a month for. It was a late 18th century row house in Philadelphia that was completely destroyed, and I went in there and started renovating and painting and doing everything, and fixed that house up to live in. And then the second one, I've done so many houses over the years. I've done many historic houses, and I really like doing it. I know how to organize it. I know how to. I understand the history of it. I understand how things work. I understand construction. I understand all those things, and I really enjoy it. It's sort of an avocation. The house that I'm doing this in right now is a house that I completely renovated from scratch. A 1780s house.
Okay, so they're always existing houses. You never want to build from scratch?
Oh no! The house that I did the Live from Daryl's House show in, I did. I took two houses down in near Hartford, Connecticut, and moved them to Dutchess County, New York, and built them from below the foundation up. So I reconstructed those houses out of the original materials.
Okay, let's just say this is what you like to do. Are you always looking for a project? How do you find the houses?
Well, I'm always sort of in a project. I don't think there's been much time that I haven't been under construction or in a situation where there's construction going on under my direction.
But as I say, what do you decide? How do you find the projects to work on?
Well, a lot of in just about all the cases, there were houses that I wound up living in for at least a while.
Okay, so you say you really know how to do it. Let's say we find a classic house, 1700s, 1800s, in need of repair. Walk me through the steps of bringing it up to your standards.
Well, it depends what it needs. I mean,
let's talk about the worst case scenario.
What might that be?
That might be something that needs foundational work, needs detail work.
Okay.
To what degree can you do with your friends? To what degree do you need to outside contract? Stuff like that.
I see. Okay, sure. You need specialists, because that's the whole thing. That's one of the things I like about it, is that all these people are artisans and they do things. I like to do things in a way that were done originally. I don't like to bring things in unless I have to that are modern additions to it. For example, this house that I'm in, I had foundational issues. The wall over by not this room, but in the other side of the house, was starting to cave in around where the chimney stack is. And I had to shore that up. I had to use I-beams, and I had to restructure the wall to shore up the foundation. I had columns. I had to, that weren't there before. Well, there you go. That's how you fix a foundation.
You need to say you're a working musician. To what degree are you supervising all this?
Well, it depends on the project. I was very much supervising the Flint Hill project because I was there. It has to do with proximity. This house, it's been taking me forever to do. It started with I had the TV show, and that's when this house that I'm sitting in started. That project, and I'm now just finishing it because I've been working so much that I couldn't be around physically, and so it's taken years to bring to completion. But I find that you have to use good GC. You have to have a sympathetic GC, somebody who really understands antique architecture, and I have an architect who is my friend as well as she's an amazing. She has amazing ability to work with antique projects, and I trust her. I trust her. She does the heavy lifting, literally, and does the drawings and all that. But it's all about my decision making.
Anybody who's involved with construction know that it's done by individuals, and it's never perfect. To what degree has this been your experience, and to what degree do you let things go? To what degree do you make them do it over?
Nah, well, toward the end of one era of this project that I'm in, I had a GC walk off the job. He was a jerk. He basically, I turned him on to some people, and instead of and he left me for those people. I mean, that's one of those kind of things. And so I was stuck. I was stuck without a GC. I was stuck without, and I was in the middle of it was a very difficult time. I was not getting along with my wife, and I don't want to get into that. But I had to hire an architect, and I hired a GC from the area that I really wasn't that familiar with, and a construction company to sort of keep the project going. And they acted like they knew what they were doing, but they didn't know what they were doing. And then I wound up having to go on the road to pay for all this. And anyway, long story short, that's when they started doing fucked up things. And I came back and said, what is this? And I did make them rip things out. I'm still in the process of some of the things of undoing some of their bad work. So that happens.
So you enjoy it, but when the process is done and you sell it, are you in the black or the red?
Depends on the time. Depends on the real estate time. Right now, I would be in the black, because it's a good time for real estate. But if like the Flint Hill project, it was sort of a financial disaster, because I was doing it all. That was my major one, my big work, right? And magnus opus, and I completed it when 2008, right when the real estate, when everything fell to pieces, when nothing was worth anything. So that wasn't such a great result, but the project itself was amazing.
So how many houses do you own right now?
Oh, well, this one that I'm in, I have a studio house that's about a couple miles away, and I have a family house in London.
Okay, so tell me about the genesis of Live from Daryl's House.
I just had, it was an idea, a simple idea that I could bring the world into me, as opposed to me going to the world. And at the time, the internet wasn't being used for entertainment in any way. It was being used for communication and information, and things like that, and commercialization. But nobody really had anything that resembled an entertainment show. At least nothing important, especially not a music show. So I decided I was going to do a music show, and I got somebody to fund it, which is super important. Changed my life. And we started doing it. We just did it. It was all very real. And I said, no audience. Let's just get in a room and with people and show the world what it's like to be in the inner sanctum of musical creativity and interaction. And one of my first guests was Smokey Robinson. I called in my cards, I called in I was just on the phone with people. And Smokey unbelievably came up to Dutchess County, which is not that close to anywhere. And he came up, and it was amazing. And that was one of the first shows. But and it just went from there, and people really responded to it. and I was so happy. It made me so happy. It's the happiest I've ever been is doing these shows and that series. It fulfilled me. It defined me, really. It shows people what I do, what I'm like as a person, what I do in life, what I'm good at, and yeah. So I got some new shows coming.
Okay, that was going to be my next question. So, you put them out as a web series. As you say, the buzz was unbelievable, and you were way ahead of everybody else. Then ultimately you got a deal for television. So what's the status of it now?
Well, everything changes now. I have regained the funding, and so that's an important part. This is not an easy show to do financially, and but having said that, how to put it out, I'm not sure, because everything changes. I mean, how do I want to put it out now? I mean, I've been toying with the idea of just going on YouTube and putting it out that way. Because YouTube is now a channel unto itself. Maybe do a combination of, I don't know. I haven't found, I don't know where its spot is going to be, but it's going to be somewhere, obviously. But the thing is that it is an international show. And whatever I do will be, I want to do something that makes it easier for everybody around the world to watch it. So I may use regular terrestrial television. I might use some streaming service. I might use YouTube. I don't know yet, or a combination thereof.
So how many shows do you plan to do?
I'm going to start with 6, next one season, and then let's see.
Now, how expensive is it to do a show?
Well, it costs money, but it's not the production. The production is relatively, a little bit of money, but it's the clearances and all that stuff. There's a lot of money. You have to pay a lot of people, artists and publishers, there's a lot involved in it, a lot of legal things and a lot of machinations, and it was hard to get going in the beginning because there was a lot of people who didn't understand what I was doing, and they thought that I was trying, some people thought that I was like Napster Jr., back in those days, that I was trying to steal from the artist, not enhance the artist's career. So I had a lot of resistance to get this stuff started, but I will say my manager and me figured it out how to do it.
And at this late date, because you've done so many, at first you call in your cards. How do you select guests now?
Well, I still call in cards. I have some feelers out right now that are interesting ones. But a lot of it comes down to scheduling. Most artists have lives, and they work, and they're on the road, and they're not necessarily anywhere near upstate New York. So there's a lot of that's actually one of the biggest factors in trying to get people to figure out how they're going to actually be able to do the show. Most people say yes. That's the funny thing. Not funny, that's the happy thing. People say, yeah, sure, man, I love that show. I watch it all the time. And I say, okay, when can you do it? Well, I'm doing a tour maybe next year, that kind of thing.
So will it be done in the same space with the same format, with cooking, etc.?
I think so. I'm going to incorporate this house, which is different than the old house, and I do it in my club. So I think I'm probably going to do the music in the club and the food and conversation and dinner here in this house, which is only a couple miles away.
Now, people always talk about owning a club and owning a bar, but it is a business and it's an incredible headache. So how did you decide to own the club, and how much of your input and hands-on attention does it need?
Well, luckily I have a partner, and he has another club. He has a club in the West Coast, and so his club is a version of the kind of club that I have. And so he understands that. It started with a lot of his bringing his cook in and things like that. So I had a lot of help in getting it going. I make the creative decisions, I have a lot to do with the food. We figured out as far as the booking goes and things like that. And I leave the actual nuts and bolts financing and that area to my partner, who, like I said, has plenty of experience in this. I will say that we managed to somehow survive the pandemic, which was really not easy.
So prior to the pandemic, is this just a labor of love, or can you make any money?
Well, it's sort of it's a generator. You know, I have people from all over the world come and play there, and people from all over the world actually come there. So it's become a physical shrine to whatever it is, the Daryl's house kind of thing, and it is a labor of love. I love clubs. I love the idea of clubs. Clubs are where all the good stuff happens, and the best music, and and it's also the place that I do my show out of. You know, it's a home for me. It's the home of the show. So it's it provides a lot of there's a lot of that generates out of it.
Okay, just to be clear, where the original episodes were shot live from Daryl's house, that is not the club. That's a house you used to own, right?
Yeah, that's the Flint Hill house that I created from scratch.
And you ultimately sold that when?
In about 20. I don't know. 2012, I'll say, something around in that area. Maybe 2013. I don't know.
Okay. Needless to say, we're all getting older by the minute, and no one gets out of here alive. Do you feel that at all? That, there's a limited time left and you want to accomplish, or you just want to ride? What's your perspective on aging and, the Grim Reaper?
Well, my perspective is that at this time of life, it is time to not pull any punches. Do whatever it is that fulfills, for me, I'll say me. Do whatever it takes to fulfill myself. Do it now. Do it. Don't fuck around. You want to do something, go do it if you can do it. Because there ain't that much of a future. Come on, I mean, I'm going to do it until I can't do it. And I'm very lucky that I have a pretty good genes. My mother's 98. And my father was 96 when he died, and that wasn't his fault. I think I have some time left, but I'm going to do my best to take advantage of that time. What else can I say?
Needless to say, you started a long time ago when music really drove the culture. You had a hit. Everybody in the world knew it. Today, we live in a very broad culture where a number one hit reaches fewer people than ever before. In addition, there are scenes that don't seem to stream that well, but do incredible live business. Do you keep up on hit music, or you just say, I'm doing what I'm doing, that's just something different?
I don't keep up with anything. I don't try to. I listen to music randomly. I'm not a great audience, although I'm a very heartfelt audience when I like something. I'm really a lucky person because that what you talked about, I experienced. I had a hit, the whole world knew about it. It was that. I benefited from that. I made my bones on that, and I used that for what I do now, which is very tribal. And I can relate to tribalism very well. I mean, I like having my people and playing to the people that give a shit about me. And I mean, it's worked out very well in my favor, I feel.
Okay, we both came of age in the 60s. 50s were sort of somnambulant. 60s come along, the boomers take over. There's a war of the generations, the Vietnam War. Needless to say, it's radically different. What do you think about today's environment?
Well, we live in a dysfunctional, crashing and burning world. That's a whole other podcast if you want the truth. I mean, I don't even know what to say. I see this horrible, horrible disparity between mindsets, and that's uncrossable. And I don't see things getting better. I'm a historian, maybe an amateur historian, but I'm an historian, and I see parallels, man. We're headed for the dark ages. Good luck.
Well, we've believed in the 60s that music could save the world. Does music have a role, or have times changed, or it never had that power?
I think that there was a time where music actually did have a lot of power. It really did. Beatles come to mind. It was changing things. It drove a social movement, I think, in the late 60s. Now, does music have any power? No. But it can't, because of what you said before. Because you can't have a hit and then everybody in the world hears it. So you have your tribe, and that's it. It's never going to have that kind of ability to move people. It can't possibly.
And what about legacy? Do you care if you're remembered? Do you care if your songs last?
Well, I'll take the John Lennon thing and say, who gives a shit after I'm dead? Do I care? No. Caring is a funny word. I'm proud of what I've done. And that's all I can say about it. People could, once it leaves me, it belongs to the world.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Daryl, I want to thank you for taking the time. It's very insightful. Great to learn things I didn't know. Thanks again.
Sure, man. Good to do it.
You bet. Till next time, this is Bob Lefsetz.